Yes, respectful of everyone's time, we made a little bottom line up front summary of what to expect on this talk today. We're doing a tactical look at one specific company, but you can use the workflow that we showed today to investigate any company and use it for multiple disinfo investigations. Also, there's some overlap with, I wasn't expecting this, but from the lightning talks, Mike and David at Meta mentioned some stuff about Uyghur activist groups being targeted, and Shane at Google mentioned Spamoflosh Dragon, and we see some instances of both of those in our research today. And yeah, so we're going to be going over disinfo attribution. We're going to be looking at how to look at marketing firms and advertising firms that are working and doing disinfo on behalf of countries, and we're going to be pivoting off of some breach data. And this is an investigation workflow, and this should be the China flag emoji, which got broken up in whatever conversion we used, so apologies for that. So who am I? I've been at Nisos for about 1.5 years doing counter disinfo investigations as a security researcher. I also am a Digital Sherlock's fellow at the Atlantic Council's DFR lab. I've previously worked at Immunity Inc., and I am a University of Miami Cane, so go Canes. So disinformation investigations, there's no one-size-fits-all. At Nisos, we have a lot of different tools that we can use to investigate disinfo, and this depends on customer requirements, really, like what we're trying to do. But for this talk today, we're going to be using narrative tools such as social listening tools. We're going to be looking at outlets, domain registration data, DNS data. We're going to be using social network analysis tools and looking at digital footprint collection. We have some spicy stuff like mobile ad tech data and NetFlow data at Nisos, but it's not used for this research. Yeah. So when it comes to narratives about China, this is something that I track a lot in my free time. There was a narrative last year in the last months of the Trump administration. Mike Pompeo over at the State Department delisted the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which is a group that China uses to justify their crackdowns on Uyghur Muslims throughout China and justify their global war on terror. So with Mike Pompeo delisting them, it kind of was a middle finger to China, and China was not happy because they used this group as a justification for everything that they're doing. So I figured, hey, this isn't something that a lot of people really know or talk about in English language, social media content. So who's going to be talking about this online? We call this a narrative. So narratives can be very broad or niche, depends what you're trying to look up. If you're trying to investigate like COVID-19 disinformation online, that's a narrative that's like very broad. Everyone's talking about it because everyone's life has been affected by COVID, but that's not a good narrative to do your research on if you're trying to do attribution. So the East Turkestan Islamic Movement delisting is a very niche narrative that we actually found disinfo pretty easily earlier this year. So back to tools, and this is not a plug for Meltwater. This is just an example to show you guys like how does this work actually happen at a company like Nisos and other disinfo companies. Meltwater is a social listening tool that lets you search specific keywords en masse across social media sites. So you don't have to do manual searches on Twitter, on Facebook, or any other social media site or blog space that you're trying to investigate. So there's so many tools that can do this kind of work, and I don't even know if this type of tool works anymore, but this is what we use for the research, and just wanted to show you guys step by step how the sausage is made. So here I did a search of ETIM and China to see who's talking about the topic that we discussed as our narrative. And the little bit of filtering, I filtered out Twitter results, and we're just looking at Facebook posts and comments related to this topic. So Meltwater's picking up people mentioning both of these keywords. And as you can see, majority of this is like body comments on mainstream media outlets like DW and RFI. Going through these results, I saw something really strange. So I read a lot of news, and there was one outlet I did not recognize that had a very big reach, and it's called Tea House. And unlike the other results, it's not a comment, it's an original post. So I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, it has 4.5 million likes, and I've never heard of this. So we go to the post that that is pointing to from our tool, and we look at it directly. So some of the things that we found suspicious from this post, and keep this in mind, if you're doing disinfo investigations, you want to think like this, because you don't want to go down random rabbit holes about narratives that are not specific, or posts that are just like body looking because you think it's Russia or China. Like you have to be very conscious of your time. So for this post, we can see that unlike the other results from our tool, it's an original post, not a comment. We don't really recognize this mainstream media outlet in the US. The actual post is a very high production value video that is talking about this very specific narrative from a pro-China angle, filmed in London by someone who claims to be a Muslim activist that I'm not familiar with. And so this actor is in this video made for Tea House. And another strange thing is Tea House, like we had seen in the previous slide, had 4.4 million likes, and the post only has 79 likes. And I don't know about you guys, but I've got like 400 Instagram followers, and I get more likes on my post than this Facebook page, so that's kind of suspicious. So when we follow the page to the post to the page that originates from, we find a commercial firm. So we see that on the page transparency for this page, it says that it's run by some company that's responsible for it in Mandarin and in English. And I'm not fluent in Mandarin at all, so I do what the rest of us do, and I just Google it. So when we Google this, we get a domain, yanghotong.cn, and depending on where your computer is coming from, it'll redirect you to onesite.cn or onesite.com. So that's the commercial firm that we're investigating today. There's a lot of OSINT that I did on that company looking at their website directly. What OneSite does is they do a lot of legitimate marketing and PR for Chinese products and e-commerce outside of China. So like on places like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. So on the outset, it's a very legitimate company, but we found a lot of their activity was doing a lot of government disinfo that they don't even talk about publicly. So we discovered the marketing firm, and now we're going to go to the next section. So I'm not going to stand up here and admit to a CFAA violation because it's illegal to hack companies, but we don't have to worry about doing that if some other person or group hacks the company that we're investigating. So last August, there was a hacktivist group called CCP Unmasked, and what they did is that they hacked OneSite and 2 other Chinese social media monitoring firms and dumped a ton of data on them, such as like screenshots of their tools, screen recordings of what's happening internally, internal communications like memos, and they just dumped it online because they wanted people to investigate it. CCP Unmasked, we don't know who that is, kind of like the talk on intrusion truth. They just did this dump and they haven't been attributed to any other hacktivist campaigns that I'm aware of. So we went ahead and we obtained some of the hack materials that they have, and the hacktivists had logged into OneSite's internal tools and dashboards and took screen recorded videos of what the hell was happening. And what we have is an extremely complex and sophisticated social media management tool that allows for mass posting from multiple personas and accounts. So just breaking this down a little bit more granularly, we have that there's a field in the middle where you can search through accounts that have already been created by you, like for their names or industry or different attributes. And then we have the table on the bottom that lists the actual personas with an ID number that's internal and links to external selectors like emails, phone numbers, etc. So this is kind of like a gold mine for us as disinfo investigators because attribution is very difficult when you go from content to actor. But here we have attributes that are directly attributable to a specific organization. So we can play with this a lot, and I'll show that later in the presentation. But this tool in general, very sophisticated software that they built, and us at Nisos, we got one of our Chinese linguists to translate every single frame of the video. So if any of you guys are interested in that or a full selector list from this research, please see me personally, because I will not email this to someone I haven't met at this conference, and we'll provide that. But the important thing is we have all these personas that are posting on social media, and they have their phone numbers and email addresses that we can pivot off of and look into. And if you want to have some fun, look at this unique domain that's the one above QQ. So every single persona in this tool, it's kind of like a real person. They have multiple social media accounts, and it's really easy to use because they'll list out like what's the quantity of Facebook accounts it's connected to, what's the quantity of Twitter accounts, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, etc. Also has a selector that it was assigned to, like the phone number. It has, and really interesting, it also has the IP address and timestamp. So if you have any interest in pivoting off of that with NetFlow data, you can go and have some fun. For the sake of time, like I said, there's a lot of features that we were not able to show you today. But one of the most interesting things was near the end of the video, there are a lot of sections of this tool that imply social media surveillance and other sophisticated features. This is just a mapping of Chinese on the right to English on the left. And they appear to have some sort of a tool that can look at how Facebook operations are happening granularly. They have some sort of feature to look at how accounts in their network are performing and potentially like surveillance of specific accounts on Facebook. And it's not just limited to that platform. There's a lot of different social media networks that they're active on. And this is just limited to what the hacktivist was able to film and exfiltrate before they're potentially kicked out. So like I had promised, since we have selectors from the video, we can go ahead, plug those in to social media sites and see what the hell are these accounts posting about. We can see that the personas that this company has set up, some of them, they vary in two themes. One of the themes are just fake people, the others are fake companies. This company, for example, is a company that sells PPE equipment, and most of their posts are about PPE equipment. But in between the posts, they have a lot of like videos and propaganda videos that are anti-US, for example, on COVID narratives, and pro-China, anti-Trump. And this is pretty suspicious because like a PPE company has no use of like posting this, and that's why we get to some of the overlap with Spamouflage Dragon, which isn't attributable to a specific company, but it rhymes a little bit with some of the video content that other researchers have talked about. Another investigation pivot point that I just wanted to show you guys in the room, since a lot of you do investigate this, is since we have one Twitter account, this is being the Twitter account from the PPE company, we can, and we have one domain that was mentioned in the website on the video, hack video, we can use some tools like RiskIQ to plug in that Twitter account and see, hey, what other domains are connected to this threat actor? And we go from like one data point to 6 new domains. So if you're trying to scale like very attributable selectors, this is just one example. We did a lot of OSINT on this, and I can talk all day about how many hours I've spent on this, but that's just one interesting tidbit. Not many of you, I'm not sure if many of you have used this. Some of the Twitter personas that were used in this operation, for example, this is a person, and it was a very old account. This has very benign content. On the left, was pretty dormant, and then during COVID started posting all this COVID-19 disinformation and linking to Chinese state media on YouTube and talking about, how, disputing the origins of COVID-19. Another persona, which is still active and you can go follow on Twitter right now, is this account that claims to be from Taiwan. And it has quite a significant following. And after the fall of Kabul, it tweeted about how, the US is weak and, they got defeated by the Taliban, and follows the same anti-US narrative. If you guys are in the room and if you just want to get more selectors off of really solid selectors, we know that we can do password resets and kind of interpolate what email addresses potentially belong to a specific account we're looking at. So for the account of Taiwan, we're able to guesstimate that it's probably the account handle at gmail.com. And plugging that into Google, we do get back the Google ID, and it matches with the name and location of the account. And then this other account, I wasn't able to figure out what domain that is. So if any of you guys have any ideas, let me know after the conference. But this one was suspended, so you can't really do much with this account anymore. When we go on like Facebook, for example, looking at this firm, this profile here, QN, was a persona built to boost the PPE company that we had shown in the previous slides. And even its posts on Facebook were also like COVID-19 narratives from China that are anti-US, anti-imperialist, and this one here is talking about how the Russian vaccine is good. And what's really interesting is that if we go to the friend list for this account, it has a lot of like accounts that either look farmed or body or just really suspicious. For example, there's a Jammu and Kashmir profile, which is not a friend, like that's not a person, that's a conflict. And it has a pro-Pakistan like flag on it. So like you can go down a rabbit hole looking at each of these profiles and seeing, hey, are they doing IO related to Southeast Asia, related to other Muslim countries? Are these like laying dormant? What's happening? So that's just some food for thought. There are people, like we also don't know if these accounts were built by the same actor that set up QN persona, or if they're a bot on the e-crime marketplace. So that's just some unknowns that we don't know, but we do know these are all friends of an account that we know is attributable to one site. And then this is supposed to be the Chinese emoji, flag emoji. But yeah, there's a direct attribution to the Chinese government. I'll show you how. So in 2019, ProPublica did some great research where they're looking at pretty much the equivalent of FedBizOps or GSA over here in the US on the federal contracting side, but in China, and looking at companies that were providing digital services to the Chinese government. So they found that Chinese government was paying in Chinese currency money to one site to boost the Twitter following of China News Service, which is a state-controlled media outlet in China, and they were paid like around like 175K US dollars for an operation lasting a certain period within 2019. And one site, when you do OSINT on them, when you look at their website, they never talk about their government customer. So this is not something that they publicize or overtly talk about. And we're able to look at more government contracts on China's system for posting info like that, and potentially find other firms. However, funny enough, unlike GSA or FedBizOps, which doesn't delete data, China immediately deleted all the contract data once people had reported on it. So this just gives you a sense of scale of how much money is potentially at stake by the people helping enable information operations in China. This is like almost $200,000 for like one Chinese news service, and there's like over 30 of them, and this is only on Twitter for a certain amount of time. So, you know, you can kind of enumerate, you can do your own like approximation of how many companies there are, what's the average contract cost, and what are all the platforms they're interested in, and get a guesstimate of how much potential money is potentially available for Chinese companies doing this to like compete in the IO space. So again, the key takeaways that I hope you guys learn is that we can do disinfo actor attribution by going from content to actor. We can investigate companies that are doing the IO marketing on behalf of governments, like we showed on Meltwater, and that page was run by one site. We can show that, and this being very new, because no one had talked about this tool, like some of the tools that these companies will build if they're very technically sophisticated to enable their IO. And a little fun bit about how do you pivot off of hacked data, because when one site, when CCP Unmasked released their data dump, it was just data, and they were desperately looking for researchers to pivot off of it and find some stuff that later could be reported on. So breach data is very cool, and just like with some of the other talks we had seen today, you can do a lot with it. You just got to keep an eye on which countries or types of breach data do you want to look at for whatever your organization is working on combating or investigating. And yeah, you can follow this workflow for multiple countries and types of disinfo projects. Some other reporting on one site that just wanted to let you guys know. There is a New York Times article that looked at the memos included in the data dumps, kind of like organizationally, how is the disinfo being paid for and spread, which I think is really cool, because if you understand the process, it may be easier to combat at scale if they're persistent. Then there is a reporting by ProPublica on Twitter operations that they attributed to one site. However, their attribution is not that solid, and I would be very cautious about attributing something publicly unless you can prove it really well, because that just does injustice if like the accounts aren't run by an entity. People will just say you're fake news. And The other companies that were included in the leaked data that CCP Unmasked had hacked, there was also a company called URun Big Data, and there was a company called Analysis. And one of the slides, company slides that URun had for their Twitter ops was this, where they list social media as weapons. And they created this infographic with the Twitter icon, guns saying, you know, your enemy is gonna be, you know, like this is just us bringing attention to what these people are doing and what their actual intentions are. If they're making marketing material like this to their government customers, they're not good people. And we should do our best to combat this, to protect audiences online and make sure they're not being influenced by foreign actors that are faking engagement and content online. So any questions or comments? I do have an email address and Twitter, so you can tweet me or follow me. If you want any data, please see me in person at this conference, just because of some risky data. But yeah, I'm all ears for what you guys want to hear.
So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little on the spamouflage related activity you saw. Did you see some of that being conducted by this specific organization, or what were the kind of overlaps there?
Yes, a great question. So a spamouflage dragon, which when other threat intel shops wrote about it, did not really focus on attribution. They focused a lot about content. And when you do look at the disinfo content posted by the accounts that we've already attributed to one site, they follow a lot of the same like video format and copies from like Chinese state media. So that's where I see a lot of the spamouflage dragon overlap. But keep in mind, like there's at least 3 companies doing social media disinfo for the Chinese government from those leaks. So can we go from spamouflage dragon to a specific company? You need something more technical like that. But maybe they're all doing the same operation under different contract prices to, you know, see who's doing it best. But that's the context in which I brought up spamouflage dragon. Does that answer your question? Great.
Thanks for the talk. I just had a question about the contract information you were talking about. So I've always wondered, in particular, when there are marketing firms working for either a government entity, a media company, a company like Mercedes, how to differentiate between, if all you've got is contract data, whether the organization that they're working for directed or had the intent of them doing this type of like clandestine influence campaign on their behalf, or if they simply have a marketing relationship and aren't aware of what the marketing firm's doing for them. Do you have a sense from what you've seen whether there's even a knowledge on the state media side that this is what those contracts are for, or did the contracts lay that out?
So I would defer that to the New York Times analysis, because they look at the boring memos that actually will go down in detail on how these operations are going, like from the organization to the companies or state media outlets to the firm that's being contracted out. Does that answer your question? Because the novel thing that we wanted to show was the tool that no one had talked about. So yeah, the article I'm referring to, if any of you didn't catch it, is on the last slide as the New York Times. So if you read that, I think that'll give you a more granular, detailed deep dive into your question.
Hi, I have an observation and 2 questions. The observation that persona Misha Uryakova sounds like a Czech name. And 2 questions. That organization called QUEN, K-Q-U-E-E-N, is it possible there's any relation to QAnon? And the other question is it possible that leaked data was poisoned, the hacked data of CCP?
So the first question being about, my bad, your first question was about one of the selectors. Yes, so you're talking about the Twitter account, Misa Orevoha, which I don't see any Czech connection because I looked at all the tweets, but we're originating all of our social media leads and selectors and handles from the hacked data that was like filmed and screen recorded like surreptitiously by the hacktivists. So it could be that there's a localized like or intention when they set up this account to influence Czech stuff, but the only content we see is the anti-US pro-China narratives on COVID-19, and this was burned pretty quickly and taken down by Twitter. The other question is on poison data, right? Yeah, so there's nothing to say that what CCP Unmasked talked about or leaked was manipulated, because other groups like ProPublica and New York Times have done research off of what they've talked about. So I have a hard time believing that it's not real. And you can do a technical analysis of the subnets that are hosted on like onesite.com. And potentially see social media traffic or other sorts of traffic. So we know that one site has done work for the government because of the government contracts, and this was not something they like to talk about. And there was some deep dive I did on their website where they were leaking some of the government pages they were promoting, but that didn't fit into the slide count for this conference. But if you want to talk more in detail, you just see me after the talk.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk. When I find these really interesting, but when we have found some similar operations of just like something that looks suspicious, some fake kind of news, online media leading to some agency leading to some operation, it feels a bit serendipitous of, someone just happens to stumble across the website and have used tools like Meltwater before, and it feels just like a big fire hose of information. So when thinking about, the best way to come across these things, do you feel that you just need to be watching the conversation and it's like pretty monotonous work, right? Just doing it ongoing, or do you have any strategies for
I'm a big fan of, a lot of this work is needle in the haystack, and you want to look for the right haystacks, and you want to be very precise in what you're researching. Like I said, COVID-19, if you're just looking at narratives and chatter about that, it's just going to be too much noise. Look for something that the person or a country or group of interest is like extremely furious about or like cares about, and then no one gives a shit about on the US or English social media side. Because if you find content that is being posted by like predominantly English like language accounts, and it's not something that people in the West talk about, that's pretty suspicious, and you can find a lot of good leads, because this took, didn't take too much time for me to find. And also on Meltwater, didn't fit the slide count, but there was a breakdown of where the accounts that were posting about this narrative originate from. Number 1 was US, number 2 were China, and number 3 was Hong Kong. But when you look at the content, a lot of it was in Mandarin. But Meltwater is pulling the US location from how these accounts are self-certifying where they're from, like their Twitter location, in their bio, or other, self-reported, like when people fill out their profile. So I think it's pretty indicative that the accounts that are talking about this in the time period that we did the research are likely not authentic. And when they're pushing this narrative that like no one in the US really talks about outside of some fringe outlets, it's definitely a much better use of your time as an investigator to think more precisely about what you're going to search if you're going the route from when you're going from content to actor. And then just one question, like when you say we, because you're not an organization, I'm just curious like where you're coming from, like tech company side or academic side, because okay, yeah. So there's no standardized way of like how we do these investigations, and that's a mix of just business decisions, also like to make sure that the threat actors are constantly evolving how they do disinfo. So I don't know if like a MITRE attack type framework would work to counter disinformation, but all I could do is tell you guys about some workflows that worked really well for me, and that I suggest you guys also look at, like narrative to suspicious pages, groups, websites. We have a colleague who did great work on a Honduras disinfo this week, and we use this very similar workflow to get disinfo that we're able to attribute to a nation state. So if you want to talk in detail, like talk shop, like just see me after the talk, and more than happy to elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you.